Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "For it isn't enough to talk about peace, one must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it, one must work at it." Welcome to my second couch conversation. I am very excited to have a friend, a visionary, an advocate, a leader, and a mom, Melissa Kane. I've known Melissa for probably close to 17, 18 years now, and it has been amazing to watch all that she has done in the town and on a state level. Her resume is longer than I can read right now, but the two things that I would like to point out is that she serves on the Westport Board of Selectmen and has done an enormous amount with that, and she is also the president of CAGV, which is Connecticut Against Gun Violence. We are going to talk about two things today. One is Melissa wants to talk about the steps that we are taking in our town and small towns can take to address racial inequality. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is how gun violence relates to inequality. So I appreciate you spending your time with us today. And here's Melissa. Hello, Melissa. Welcome to
Suzy.
Couch Conversation Round 2. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
Sip?
So, yes, sip and then we can chat.
Yummy.
So, before this, I did a little introduction. And Eleanor Roosevelt has some of my favorite quotes. But I also quickly talked about our longtime friendship and what an advocate you've been in this town. It's been a long time. I said like 17, 18 years, something like that.
Right. When Ethan
It gives me goosies.
Lily
I know.
were really little.
Little. More goosies. Anyway, it's been amazing. And what has really been also amazing is watching you over the last, I think we said 12 years, go into public work, public service, public, everything with the town and state. And your resume is beyond what I could really get into. So I did talk about your work with the Board of Selectmen and your work with Connecticut against gun violence. Thank you.
That's all right.
But there's so much to talk about. But where would you like to begin?
Well, just in thinking while you're saying this, I've been in, I guess, public service for about 12 years. I've been in elected office for about 12 years, but I was a volunteer long before that. And I think it's actually all volunteerism. It's actually all, and there are so many people in our community who are volunteers and put their time into trying to make the community stronger and closer and better. And I kind of feel like it comes from that. And I feel like, I feel like in the work that I'm doing now, and certainly the work I was, the reason I went into it was that I was hoping to represent people's voices. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do now at a really tough time for our country and our state and our town. It's and there's a lot of voices out there, and I feel like I just need to listen a lot and keep learning. But that's what's on my mind, I guess, after you say that. Anything,
again, because I don't want to skip over, anything really, and then we'll move into the two topics we're going to talk about today. Anything specifically in all of the work that you've done, all the different roles that you've done, that really has stood out to you as it relates to what we're going to be talking about today, which is, systemic racism here locally and what small towns can do, and then as it relates to gun violence. Is there anything specific from the beginning of your 12 years that really kind of was a catalyst for you?
It's very interesting. As you're saying that, I'm thinking there is a thread, and it is community. As I said, I went into this before I was on the RTM here in Westport. I was on the board of the library, and I was involved with a lot of not-for-profit organizations, and they were all focused on, again, the community and bringing the community together and celebrating this incredible community. And I think in all of the work that I've done, and this is from very many different angles, what I've learned and I'm learning, and I can get into the specifics of this, is how important having strong community and support for children from the very beginning of their lives all the way through and this is in the school systems, but also in the community,
Right.
supporting the children and their families, how important it is to help kids grow up in the world today, because it's such a hard place to grow up for a lot of reasons.
Right.
There are traumas from growing up in a lot of different ways, and in my work with gun violence prevention, I look at suicide, I look at homicide and gun violence in various different communities, mass shootings, community level gun violence, police gun violence,
Right.
and some of the root causes I'm really learning to understand is providing support for and life skills training for and social emotional learning for kids to help them get through growing up in the world we live in, and not have to turn to violence or despair, which leads to a lot of these things. And I mean, my gosh, all of the things we're talking about now,
Of
to
course.
my mind, very much have something to do with that. So I guess the thread is making sure in whatever community I'm working with or representing, that the community, the voice of the community is held up and strengthened.
This is probably
If
a
that
whole
makes
nother,
sense.
it totally is. It makes complete sense. And this is probably for a whole nother discussion, but are we doing a better job now than 12 years ago, or what?
Where? So I can answer. It's a good question. In our country, no. I don't think so as a whole. No. I mean, I look at what's going on now. Well, if you say in the last month, are we starting to really look at things and try and change them? Yes. But are our communities held up better? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's sadly has to do with the last 4 years, but a lot longer than that.
Right. From a town perspective?
So we live in a very, place that's a pretty spectacular place to live.
It is.
And I think our education system, we're very lucky to have that, sadly this is not something that's equitable across, school districts around the state, but we have a school district that's focused on, to a degree, and I think it could be more so, but it certainly has some focus on the emotional health of the kids that are in it. I think we're learning more and we're tailoring it more. Now, obviously, it's not the same for every kid in our community.
Right.
And we're finding and we're learning more and more, and we shouldn't be surprised that there's a stigma and there is difficulty in growing up as other in this community.
Right.
And specifically as growing up, we were going to be talking about as black or brown in this community. So is that being addressed enough? No. Is there a will to do it? I do believe there is. But no.
There's an imbalance on a lot of levels.
I think there's a big imbalance.
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. Okay, so
Which isn't to trash what our
Of course
community
not.
is doing, because I feel hopeful that because I know that the goodwill is there, that we can get to the right place.
Right.
But I think there's like a lot of steps to get there.
I think there's an enormous amount of inherently good people
Oh gosh.
here and worldwide, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I was thinking about before you got here was about when we're going to talk about the police department and the ruling, just as it relates to quickly off to the side as a town. But, one bad racist cop does not a bad police precinct make, right? It's just like I've used this example a million times, like, you have one bad chiropractor and now all of a sudden people think chiropractors are bad, right? So I think there's a lot of good, and there's a lot of people that are trying. And the other thing I'll say before we get into the town is I think the conversation I've had with a lot of people is this pandemic, this slowdown, I think in some kind of sick, twisted way, has been a huge help on putting a spotlight on what we're going to talk about. Because I wonder if we were in a different time, if what happened with George Floyd and Breonna and countless others, they haven't gotten the attention that others...
Well, people have very short attention spans.
That's true. But because of what's going on right now, it's kind of changing the complexion of how we're looking at things, I wonder.
Yeah, I've been wondering if it's that or if it's just reached a tipping point. Yes, partially maybe because of
and maybe
the
both.
Pressure everybody's under,
and maybe
but
both.
really it's just time. It's like, I know from where I stand in the gun violence prevention movement, there are tipping points.
Right.
Sadly, they haven't led to any lasting
change,
federal level change for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But we have at least moved the ball really far forward in Connecticut, in some ways. So I think you said, well, one racist cop doesn't a racist department make, which I agree with, but I don't actually think that's the issue. I think it's one issue, and racist cops need to be.
So let's talk about that, because that's a good segue into the first part, which is town efforts as it relates to systemic racism, and then we can talk about the gun part afterwards.
All right. Well, I think they're tied together. I think you can't talk about systemic racism without talking about gun violence, because the statistics are kind of staggering. I was looking at some statistics before.
So tell me about that.
Well, in the state of Connecticut, 56% of the gun deaths a year are African Americans, disproportionate to the amount of African Americans who live in the state of Connecticut by a great degree. Then you look at, and I don't have those numbers with me, but actual police violence, gun deaths with the degree of, the percentage of police shootings of people of color versus white people,
right?
And it's disproportionately higher of when you're looking at people of color. So it's a part of that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And at CAGV we're saying, and I really believe it, is that police violence is gun violence. So we need to look at both together. So if we're looking at police reform and we're looking at use of force reform, we also really need to be looking at, and this goes back, I'll talk about this later, but we really need to look at, so how are we dealing with gun violence as it affects people of color? How are we dealing with community level gun violence in our urban centers, which are disproportionately where we're seeing a lot of the gun violence in our state. So I think they're inextricably tied. When you're looking at the issues of racial inequality, and you're looking at housing equality, and you're looking at education reform, and you're looking at police violence and reform of our policing techniques and departments, you have to look at that as well. And it's a big part of it.
So we did an interview last week together, and you had talked about housing.
Yeah.
If you want to talk more about that, because
so you had said, I think you had said before, and I didn't answer the question, what's going on in our town.
Right. What's going on in our town?
What's in our town? Well, so I think I think the issue that we just have to say out loud and address, regardless of what our motivations are, what we want or what we think how good we are, is that I think that people of color, black people, for the most part, that I've spoken to and that you've I think of your sister-in-law as one of those people. When they live here, they have a kind of love-hate relationship with the town, because there is a stigma to being black in Westport. And that is part of the racism that we all have to address that's here. And, is it, in some cases, outward acts of racism? Yeah, Carlene has talked about
multiple
things that are just, heinous, and I have certainly heard things. But there's more than that, which is sort of an underlying a double standard that I don't think people see themselves as racist. But what we really need to do is re-educate ourselves, and and I'm putting myself in this, as well, which is I need to better understand how everything I do affects every other person. That's something I've been saying for a long time, and I didn't necessarily connect it to racism. I've been talking about during this pandemic how it's so important as we reopen Westport that we're aware of and hyper aware of the fact that everything we do directly impacts others. It's so important to be, how interconnected we are. So everything we do. So how we, as a municipality, look at our zoning and our policing and our education. Those are things that have to be looked at, and I think there's a lot of room for change and reform. Interestingly, though, since we had our conversation with Trevor and Jill, and I was talking about affordable housing initiatives that are going on in the town, and I'm uncomfortable sort of equating that specifically with making the town more racially diverse, because I feel like that's actually sort of a racist thing to assume. Someone said this to me, and I said, "You're right. Because there's affordable housing in Westport, that means there will be more black people. So that means the black people who are moving to town are necessarily need affordable housing. That's kind of a racist assumption."
I understand that.
Yeah, but there's the counter argument's even more racist. But the point is, we need to be looking at diversity of all kinds,
right?
And how do we, as a town, attain that?
That's right.
And I would argue that there's a lot of different kinds of diversity in housing, that's in zoning, like workforce housing, which means making sure that our town is a place that welcomes and can provide great housing opportunities for teachers and the police who work here and the firefighters and our kids who come home from going to college or going to the military or wherever they go after high school and want to be able to live in Westport. So to me, that's one of the important things about housing diversity and affordable housing. But certainly the goal of diversity is to say we're not a 99% white town, and we want people, any kind of person, to feel comfortable living here. But right now, the issue is we are addressing racism, specifically racism in our country, and we need to address it in our town. And I do think that as I was mentioning last week, so putting an end to our cap on multifamily housing, that's something that our affordable housing subcommittee of our planning and zoning commission is looking at, and advocating for with them, and the other initiatives to build more below market rate housing. That's a step in the right direction.
And I never, until we did the Trevor and Jill show last week, the housing component of it completely escaped me.
It's one component,
but it's an amazing component, and I think it is part of infrastructure in a town, and that wants to move.
It sends a message.
It does.
Right. So a couple of things are happening in town. It's going to be announced this week that there is a civilian review panel that the first selectman is convening, and he's asked me to serve on it, which will work with the police department, really with all our public safety
That's amazing.
And my goal is really for us to be, the goal is towards better accountability and transparency, and certainly my goal is that we are able to identify and eradicate those practices that are sort of perpetuating any systemic racism or inequity that exists in the town. And you know what, there, as wonderful as our police department is, and our chief, Fody, I truly, I mean, I don't know if you were at the protest with, where he kneeled, and he, was mortified by what happened, to George Floyd and the many other black people who have been murdered by cops. But he's so open to looking at any issues in the department. But the truth is there are double standards, and that was something we talked about with Carlene. Double standards that may not even feel like double standards. So it's a matter of bias training, looking at training.
We talked about, vetting from the start. Training, education,
and
the discussion is a huge part of that. So that's a great start.
It's a great start. I'm excited. So I participated a couple of years ago as a civilian member of a process for recruiting and hiring new police officers. Part of the the responsibilities of the panel will actually be involved in the hiring of new
amazing
officers. not just the police department, I believe. So it's
another step.
It's a great step, and I'm really pleased that we're doing it. I think it has to, it'll evolve, but I want it to have teeth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a commission, it's not a police commission, but I think it's I am very pleased at how open to it our public safety officials and leadership have been.
Do you think, obviously everything that's been talked about, but do you think the act, the Justice and Policing Act that went through last week, was that a little bit more of an impetus for this conversation, or this has been something that's been talked about for a while, or?
It's a mix. Yes, obviously it's an impetus.
Yeah.
Yes, but listen, anything that makes it happen is great.
That's right.
Yeah.
So number one, we talked about the housing. Number two, we talked about this program that we're talking about, which is amazing. Third part of this, and then I want to move on to the gun portion of it, is the education part. So when Carlene and I spoke, and then when we all spoke, I said that education is, whether it's from here, between conversations like you and I are having, or all the way to the school level. There's no doubt we all agree that education is part of it. From a Westport school standpoint, whether it's from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade.
And it has to be.
And it has to be. Is there any discussion on moving with a much more concise program?
So I'm not on the board of ed, but my understanding is that there is an urgency to making change where it's needed, including in our hiring practices, and looking at how we are teaching and what we are teaching,
right.
both curriculum as well as
messaging and all of that, right?
Messaging and how we do it,
yeah.
Right? That is something that is being.
Yeah, and listen, it's not going to happen overnight.
By the way, and Team Westport has gotten involved and is they are doing some very exciting things in concert with the school district and the board to try and sponsor some really, really great programming, great anti-racism training, mm-hmm. Which, listen, I would like to have for the entire community. Mm-hmm. We have a great opportunity right now.
We really do.
People are paying attention to this. So, and like I said, short attention span, so let's get on it.
Right. But we want to make sure we keep the momentum going with the conversations that we're having.
Yeah, but it has to be more than conversations. I personally feel like our town, honestly, I'll say this, the state of Connecticut is flying a Black Lives Matter flag. I think our town should be. We're not currently, but I think it's something, I just feel like we need to make it clear to the world that this is a huge priority to us, and this is who we are. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But we are, like I said, we are taking some great steps. I think this panel is going to be really, for a number of reasons, effective, hopefully. Mm-hmm. I believe that the steps we're taking to work on diversity of housing and affordable housing and zoning changes, huge, education.
Getting FODI involved. It's all amazing. It's
good.
And when I say the conversation, obviously it has to be more than more talk. It's more than just talk. The pen's got to be moved from, forward. Or else the talk is for naught, right?
Yeah, look, I'm very aware that when I see someone pulled over on the post road and there are 2 police cars, inevitably it is a person of color. I think we're all aware of that. Mm-hmm. And when I see 1 police car, it's not a person of color. Now, it may be a police department saying, well, we want to make sure that we have backup, that we're doing the right thing, that there's a body camera on, that we make sure that someone's watching, that we're treating someone right. But that's a double standard. Even if it's trying to do the right thing, it actually winds up.
And I would want to understand that too,
right?
Because the psychology of when Carlene told the story about Luke, and Staples kids walking along the street, and cut to there's 4 cop cars, there's 3 or 4 cop cars or whatever. So and
again, I don't want to implicate our police here, but I do think that there is room
to understand.
Growth. There's room for change. There's room for reform, and I think they're open to it, which to me is heartening.
Yes, I don't want to implicate them either. Again, I don't know if I eloquently expressed it, but I think as a whole they are an amazing group. And it's a matter of maybe their education, us understanding more, and then, change being made. So, okay. So for the sake of time.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to say on that? You sure?
No.
So much we could say, but
I mean, there's so many things. This is just a part of the conversation.
Right.
We could talk about this for a long, long
I
time.
know.
We could sit on your couch for
more bubbles later. Okay, so I have no agenda of where to go with this conversation about gun control as it relates to racism. So I'm just going to put it out to you what you want to talk about.
Sure. No, I just think it's very important. In our state, we have a real opportunity. So the organization I'm involved with, Connecticut Against Gun Violence, has been working for the last 20 years to pass laws to make gun violence, hopefully eventually end gun violence in the state of Connecticut. And we've been pretty successful. We have at the moment, third strongest gun laws in the country behind...
Really?
Yes, we're behind New Jersey and California, but I don't know. I feel like,
well, congratulations, because you've had a big hand in that, so that's amazing.
You know what? It's a great organization, and the people who work for us and the organizations that we work with are amazing, just like so incredibly dedicated, and we work with a legislature who have been amazing in passing these laws, and we're really like a model for the rest of the country, which is wonderful. But we haven't done enough. And one of the areas that we are very focused on, and we've been focused on, is sort of coincidental, what's happening now. So this legislative session was cut short. I mean, it started at the beginning of February and ended.
And then we all know where that went.
Our
Right?
priorities and what we were lobbying for was the creation of a standing commission on community level gun violence, which means we wanted to look at, not just look at, and fund tangible ways to address the issue of urban gun violence.
So what does that look like?
Well, it's been
a whole nother.
that's a lot more than
another thing to unpack.
But it looks like bringing together the right people around the table, including law enforcement, but including the organizations that are on the ground in these communities where gun violence is such an issue. So, Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, they're big, but there are incredible organizations working on the ground to support people who, they're sort of interrupters, violence interrupters, and people who are also working with victims and families. And there are hospitals. Yale New Haven Health is doing incredible work working with those organizations that are, going into communities and giving people other options. So to interrupt the cycle of violence.
Interesting.
But to have the right people around the table to come up with a solution, because it's not just about a law. That was the issue. You can pass legislation. So we've passed legislation to ban ghost guns. We've passed legislation for safe gun storage in the home and in vehicles. We've passed extreme risk protection order legislation. We were the first state to do that, and it needs, one of our other priorities is it really needs to be tightened. But that is a way to take firearms away from someone who poses a clear danger to themselves or others. So that's the extreme risk protection order. But where we really haven't made the dent that we need to is in entrenched gun violence that's happening in these urban communities. And we believe that it's not going to be, we can't address it from outside the community. It has to be addressed, the funding needs to go to the organizations that are getting it right now, but need more funding. And it needs to be data driven, and that needs funding as well. So we had gotten a lot of really good feedback about this. We were looking at either having, it being a bill that went through the Judiciary Committee and hopefully, was something that we could try and pass. But if that wasn't going to happen, we were actually looking to the governor for an executive order. So it's something that we're working to do. Well, fast forward COVID,
tabled all that.
Everything's tabled. Fast forward George Floyd and this awakening that, we need to do something, yesterday or 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah, really.
But and we've had a lot of people come out in our state legislature, members of government, saying we want to reopen for a special session. We want the governor to reopen the legislature for a special session that addresses the issues of racial inequality, of racial injustice. And we found that what they weren't addressing were the issue of gun violence. And so we've put out an op-ed and said, wait, this is a big part of the problem. And they said, oh yeah, you're right. Like, we get it.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's totally connected. So I'm really hopeful that if and when we're able to start addressing things, that a connection's understood, and the call for this commission is something that people will understand is really necessary as part of this battle.
Mm-hmm.
As I was starting to talk about earlier, the roots of gun violence among kids, teenagers, and the roots are really the roots of despair that can start from traumas growing up in a lot of different situations in our society. Certainly you're facing different ones in wealthy suburbs where, the pressures are from social media, the pressures are from, just intense competition. That's a different kind of trauma, but it is nonetheless, for some kids, very traumatic, and that's why we really, really need to be able to identify and address kids' needs, emotional needs early on. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at communities where kids are dealing with traumas like poverty, food insecurity, violence, very early, violence can occur obviously in any community, but domestic violence can happen in any community. But when you have kids dealing with this, they need support. So the root causes of things that lead to suicide, that things, circumstances that lead to perpetuating cycles of gun violence, gang violence,
drugs and all of that.
Yeah, drugs, absolutely. Yep. Opioid addiction.
Yep.
You have to start. It's so much deeper than that. It's like this entrenched system that we have. Everyone keeps saying, "Oh, the system's broken. We need to fix it." No, the system was built this way. We need to break it.
Right.
And change it, because this is the way it was built to work.
Right.
And it's not working for, a lot of this country. So. Sorry,
no, that's
all over the place.
No, that's all right. I mean, I think that, first of all, I appreciate everything you just shared. I guess I would want to close with, what can individuals do as it relates to all of this? But let's talk kind of about part number one. What can we, as people that love our town, or any town that that they live in, what can they do to be better advocates? What can they do to help change the narrative? What can they do to be better allies? One of the things that Carlene said was, after the protests, again, really across the country, largely peaceful, and certainly peaceful here, thankfully.
Yes, incredible.
Was
kids, by the way, the kids from Staples who organized the protest, which was the largest group of people I have ever seen.
It was amazing,
Westport,
right?
Were amazing, right. Amazing and inspiring, and
putting the effort in
forward.
And pushing forward. Yeah. But is there, I wonder what, so that we don't go back, as Carlene said, it's wonderful that these went on, but then turn around and go back home. And I already kind of feel like I'm not. I don't watch the news a lot, because I feel like the foot's coming off the pedal a little bit. So
it's going to with some people,
of course.
So you have to make a conscious decision that you're not going to take your foot off the gas.
That's right.
Right. So I can only tell you what I think I should do, which is listen more, like open my mind to. Okay, I've always thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe it hasn't been the right thing.
That's right.
Accept that. Just take ego right from the top, like the equation.
That's great advice. Yep.
and listen to your friends of color. And if you don't have friends of color, well, think about why you don't, but also listen to people of color, black people, and talking about what it is that they're concerned about, and that, is driving the conversation. So, I mean, I guess listening, and for me, as with everything in my life, it's about speaking, speaking out. Like when you find something and you're like, wait, this is not okay. So saying it's not okay, whether you do it through social media, whether you do it by giving money to organizations that are fighting for something, or signing petitions. Those might seem like small things, and yeah, they are small, but
individually, but then they collectively add up.
I think just gathering information is so important. Reading, there's so many books that are incredible books that help one look at someone else's experience.
Yeah,
because that's what you really have to do. There's no way we as white people can ever have experienced what black people in this country have experienced.
Right.
We can't.
That's right.
And I don't, no matter what, I don't think, there are false equivalencies, and I think we should just throw them away.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that's important. And I think so on a local level, you advocate in your town for the type of small and large changes you think are important, whether it's police reform, whether it's education reform. I was going to mention earlier, and I know we're running out of time, and I'm mortified that I didn't know this. There was a plaque on our town hall for as long as the town hall's been there, that described a historical marker plaque that described the settling of Westport, and it referred to the white settlers.
How long ago was that? Is that down?
It has been taken down.
But it's been there all this time.
It was there for a very long time, and it took a lot to bring it down. And there's a whole new, really wonderful messaging that, great language that's been written, and I'm sure we'll have to go through lots of different approvals, but right. That tells a far more accurate story of what has happened on this spot, on this land for hundreds of years, and how we got to be who we are, and it involves a lot more than just the white settlers.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and so it's a little thing, but it's an important thing.
But all these little things add up, and we are basically out of time. So I wanted to say thank you, but I think the messaging here again from a town level. The education, the housing, I think, is a fascinating piece that I never thought about before.
I have to wrap my mind around it more, but I know that.
But I understand. But I
really
really do understand where that's going as it relates to. I understand where that's going, and then again, I think this is really. I don't know if exciting is the right word, but I'm excited that there is a town to police conversation going on, so that we understand.
It's more than a conversation; it's accountability.
That's right, and all of that.
It's going to be addressing complaints.
Yeah.
Complaints, civilian complaints of police, any impropriety.
And then
and
making
police,
sure,
and then
way,
all of our fire, police, EMS, any of our public safety.
Right. And just from my standpoint, I think the ability for all of this information to be disseminated and even figure out ways to bring people that are not part of these meetings to start maybe bringing more people together in the town to have these open conversations, because otherwise it's just stuff they're going to read and then move on from.
So there is programming. There is, if people should look and see what, I know that there's a lot that Team Westport, conversations that Team Westport is doing, in partnership with the library.
That's amazing.
Which is great.
So it's in the works.
It is, but it's happening right now. But people, listen, we need to get the word out there that it's happening.
And that's why we're doing this too.
Right.
So,
so
thank you. Thank you for your time. We'll do more.
It's great. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.